You're listening to LGBT Stories during one of our hiatus months. What that means is that we are resting and we're prepping for the new year ahead. There won't be any new episodes of LGBT Stories from December throughout all of January, but that does leave room for us to share some of our best of or our favorite episodes from LGBT Stories. Thanks for tuning in, and we hope that if you haven't heard these episodes yet, that you find them just as moving as we did so many years ago. And if you've listened to the show from the very beginning, I hope that these episodes bring you back to the good old days. I hope that all your holidays are going great, and I can't wait till you see what we have lined up for next year. Enjoy the show. The episode that we are about to feature was originally aired way back on December 23rd, 2016, and was originally called The Trans Experience. This episode features a woman named Jen Winslow, who is transgender male to female, and she goes and she tells us all about her transitioning story and some of the trials and tribulations that she dealt along the way. It is a fascinating story, it's an emotional story, and it is one of the top grossing episodes of all of LGBT Stories. And it is also one of those episodes that I often get emails about thanking me for having it on the show, and those people oftentimes want me to put them in touch with Jen herself. I hope you enjoy it, and let me know what you think in the reviews on iTunes.
From my earliest experience, my earliest memory, I knew that I was different. I couldn't really pinpoint exactly what that difference was. I just knew that I felt at odds with the way I was being addressed, and I felt much more associated with the girls that were in my classes rather than the boys. I actually had a friend in kindergarten who was a girl, and we would go, and at recess we had a dress-up corner, dress-up room, or whatever, and she understood this at a very early age, and so our roles actually were swapped when we played, which was just, I remember a feeling of elation, knowing that somebody in my life knew that there was something different about me, and they got it without me actually telling them. Even though we didn't have a name for what that feeling was. Unfortunately, during the course of the latter course of kindergarten, she actually passed away. So I was left without my best friend in kindergarten, and nobody else there to pick that up. So I kind of internalized everything and progressed through. I would play with the girls at first and second grade. I would play with the girls at recess. I would really kind of avoid the guys, partially because I would use crayons to color my nails, and playing with the boys at recess, generally those nails would be scraped across the asphalt until the crayons were rubbed off, and I had bloody fingers instead. The girls didn't seem to mind, and I became their liaison between their crushes and I was the verbal note passer, I suppose, as I would go back and forth between the boys and say, hey, so-and-so likes you. Do you like them? That was my role. I was the liaison. In third grade, that was when life got tipped on its side a bit, and I started at the Christian school associated with our church. So at that point, even though they had no idea what I was struggling with internally, I was being told 6 days a week that, that I was a sinner and that I was going to hell, just by matter of association of them talking about the LGBT community as a whole. Again, they didn't know anything at all about my struggles, my research I was trying to do. But, that was it. 6 days a week. The only break I had was Saturday, which was spent usually trying to hang out with other kids in the neighborhood who also didn't know, or just staying in my room with my stuffed animals that all knew about the struggles I was going through because they would hear it at the end of every day. The research that I was doing, back, you have to, I'm 50 years old. So when I was doing this research, there was no internet. Our family had the Encyclopedia Britannica, the 1967 volume. So the only bit of information that I could find through words that I had overheard on talk shows or something like that was that I was a transvestite, and that according to the Encyclopedia Britannica, that this was an illness, and it was considered deviancy. And so even in my research, I was being told that what I felt that I was really should not exist. And I really felt alone at that point. I'm from a small town in Indiana, so, the libraries, there was one in our town, but everybody knows everybody. So if you're checking out any book that has, if we even had them, that catered to anything like that, the entire community would know. We had a larger library into town, but my mom worked at that library. So again, if I could get to any kind of book that might happen to have any information, I couldn't access it just because of the situation. So what I decided to do was be what everybody thought that I should be. So I became this perfect young man who was funny. That was my escape, was humor. But I hid it. I hid it very well. It came out a little bit in junior high, mainly in after PE class, because I refused to take showers after gym class. Luckily, gym class was like next to the last class of the day, but I felt wrong getting naked in a shower, in a locker room full of full of guys. I didn't I was at odds with my body, and I didn't want to see theirs. I didn't want them to see mine. And I got in trouble quite frequently for this, but caused such a ruckus when they tried to force me to take a shower that they just kind of backed off. It was at this time, around junior high, you started having talk shows like Phil Donahue being on the air, and he actually is where I started to learn more about the broader spectrum of where I fit in. A lot of his shows really had to do with female impersonation, drag, things like that. But every so often you would have one of those drag performers that lived as a woman full time. So it wasn't just a show for them. And through that, as you would see the audience ebb and flow with being furious at this person for doing what they're doing to being compassionate about this person, I knew that I was hearing terminology that might move me in the right direction, even though I still couldn't access books that may have that. So again, those were my little victories. I held them close. I held them, I told nobody, and went about my life, miserably, quite frankly. As junior high drew to a close, I found that my best friend kind of experienced the same thing. We were talking one day, and it came out, and it seemed like, although not to the degree of mine, I think he really fell more into the line of a crossdresser or a transvestite, or however you want to label those, using terminology from back then. And so we had this common bond, besides really kind of looking like one another. So we now have this deeper bond. And I remember one particular Sunday going to spend the night at his house, and when his parents had gone to bed, basically we raided his sister's bedroom, and it really took me about 10 minutes to realize that I was the one that was actually wearing any of the clothes. He hadn't changed into anything. He still had his jeans and shirt on. And so we went and as if nothing, were any different, we went out, we were playing video games and that. And at one point he shut the video games off, and we were watching TV, and I noticed that, he had kept moving closer and closer to me. And I was taken aback by that, because I'd never even had, a girlfriend at this point. And he was moving closer. And finally, I mean, he was, right next to me, and he had put his arm around me. And I was pushing him away and just quietly telling him to stop because I didn't want to wake his parents up who were upstairs. And it actually gotten to the point where I couldn't push him away anymore. He was stronger than I was, and he was, fumblingly trying to kiss me and touch me, and there was no way to get away from it. I mean, I couldn't yell at him because, again, his parents would wake up, and if they came downstairs, of the two of us, I would be the one to get into trouble. And so, I managed to push him away, and I got up and I was running into the other room, but he grabbed me and pulled me back to the couch and actually threw me down and climbed on top of me. And, he put his hand over my mouth and, basically told me to be quiet. And then he took his hand away and I whispered, like, I'm going to tell, like, I have to tell. And his reply and his face had just went completely blank. And he looked at me and he was like, you're not going to tell anyone, because if you do, everybody's going to know what you are. And I don't think that you want that. So, you're just going to have to deal with it. Luckily for me, there was no removal of clothing. So there was no penetration. There was nothing like that. But, I mean, in essence, in all truthfulness, I was raped by my best friend, fully clothed, but it went through completion. At that point, I got up, changed, and was going to walk home. I mean, it was like 8 or 9 miles, but it was a straight path. And he kind of blocked the door, and he was like, and basically convinced me that I couldn't leave because if his parents woke up in the morning and I wasn't there, they would wonder why. So I kept quiet and went back to sleep. I slept on the couch and just wrapped myself up in blankets and cried the rest of the night on that. I woke up in the morning and just pretended like nothing ever happened. But needless to say, that was the end of that friendship. After that, nothing much else happened. I kind of pushed all of those feelings. Any thoughts of that were completely as buried as they could be, until high school. I finally was able to get out of our church's school and go back to public school. And at that point, even in a small town, I got to see the diversity that I had missed for the last 7 years. And Even though we were a very homogenized public school out in the country, we still had, people of different races, even though they were definitely the minority within the school, and it didn't matter. We weren't we weren't this redneck school. We were actually a really progressive public school, and there were a couple of students that were gay. And they kept it, as hidden as they could, but people knew, and if asked, they didn't deny it. And even though I knew I wasn't gay, I definitely floated toward their friendship, just because I knew that they were on the fringes of the student body, and I knew that that's where I was living as well. In high school, talk shows began to evolve more deeply. People like Donahue were not the only people on the air now. And even though I'm going to say this next name, and your immediate association listening is going to be one of probably a chuckle at first, was Jerry Springer. And when Jerry Springer started out, he was one of the most compassionate talk show hosts that were out there. He's actually one of the main reasons that Donahue ended up going off the air, because he was much more compassionate and open. And his guests included several trans people. And, these were not just female impersonators. These were not shows of, hey, is it a boy or a girl? You guess. It was very compassionate, very well thought out. And his closing statements on every single show was nothing but love and compassion. So I began to videotape these shows anytime I knew they were on. And I would have that time between school and my parents getting home where I could look these up and I could record these and basically have my own reference library whenever needed. I still kept it hidden. I mean, nobody in high school knew. None of my friends knew at this point. And it was then that the door opened. Oh, excuse me. It was then that the door opened and I went to college. Now, college gave me a huge library of resources. In fact, they had an entire gay and lesbian section, and the trans items were included in that section. Even though LGBTQ didn't exist yet, it was just Gay and Lesbian Alliance. But those books were there, and I began to spend all of my time that was free in the library. I wouldn't check the books out just because I didn't want my parents finding them in my room or something like that. So I just spent hours and hours in the library. Sometimes I would go to the copy machine and shrink them down to a third of their size so I could carry some of these articles with me just to make me feel good. At the age of 19, I was actually going out dressed as Jen, which was a name I had chosen very early on as a female name. And I would generally go around and usually just sit in my car because I was too scared to go inside. But just to be out and about made me feel normal. And doing my research and really knowing that what I was doing fit in with the experience of several other trans people. So on one particular day, I decided rather than drive around my small town, my small college town, I would go to the next town over. Because I knew nobody in Anderson, Indiana. Nobody there knew me, but I was familiar enough with the town that I could drive around and have an escape route if I got too uncomfortable or if anything happened. So on this particular day, I'm driving to different locations like the mall. There was a Kmart, things like that. But I decided that this was it. I was going to actually go inside and shop. So I go to their mall, and with all of my nerves against me, I'm walking. I drove around to the back of the mall instead of the main front entrance. And I was walking up, and about halfway to the door, I just started looking around the parking lot, and I saw this car parked nearby, and it was a black car, and it had dark windows. And so I, as with every movie you see, those are generally the cars that mean something bad. And so I actually really freaked out and decided not to go into the mall, and just to get back in my car. So I got in my car and pulled out, but I didn't want to go back home because I was enjoying the day out. But what I noticed as I drove over to Kmart was that this car was there. I hadn't noticed it following, but I saw it there. So I decided to leave, and I went over to another shopping place called Hills. And so I got there. I didn't see the car anywhere around. So I went inside and shopped around. Again, nothing bad was happening. My nerves calmed down. And as I was exiting the store, there's that car. And my nerves went straight out of control again. So at that point, I wasn't thinking, hey, I should go back into the store and let someone know. I was thinking I just needed to get away from that car. So I got back into my car and drove off and drove all over Anderson and never saw the car following me. So I was like, okay. Decided that I would do one more stop before heading home. And I went and I parked in this little plaza. And I was about ready to go in and do some shopping. And at that point, I saw the car pull into the parking lot. And so I just sat in my car, freaking out at this point, because now it was obvious that, nothing was coincidental about this. I was being followed by this car. And this time, there was a gentleman that got out of the car and walked toward my car. And he didn't do anything. He walked by, kind of looked in, and kept walking. And if you look at any 70s cop show, that's what this guy looked like. I mean, he was like, this tan blazer, a plaid shirt with a bad tie, sunglasses, mustache. He fit that description. And even though that's not really where my mind went, I knew that it was time to just go home. So I started my car and pulled out of the parking lot. And as soon as I got to the main street in Anderson, I was passed by a motorcycle cop who, as soon as we passed, he turned around, flipped on his lights, and pulled me over. I hadn't made a connection with this other car yet, and I didn't understand why I was being pulled over. But once inside this parking lot, here came the black car. And this guy had been an unmarked police car. And so, I roll my window down. I'm being very respectful of them. And, he, the cop in the car, asked for my license. So I hand it to him, and he immediately, looks at it and, what the fuck's going on? Your license says you're a guy. And trying to remain calm, not knowing what was going to happen, I was like, well, I am this, I'm just out and about. And he was like, so what are you doing? And I was like, well, nothing. I'm just like, I was doing some shopping. He's like, yeah. He goes, what were you doing back over in that plaza? And I was like, well, I was sitting there. I was debating on whether or not to go in. And then and he cut me off, and he's like, oh, he goes, you were doing something out there. He goes, I don't think debating is what you were doing. And I was caught off guard, and I was like, excuse me, what? And he goes, I think you know what I mean. He goes, I just need to hear you say it. And I was like, well, I wasn't doing anything. I was freaking out because I saw your car and you'd been following me. And I was doing nothing but trying to decide whether or not to go in. And he was like, so you're calling me a liar? And I'm like, no, I'm not calling you a liar at all, but you're wrong. And he threw my license back in the car and he stepped away. And so in a classic case of good cop, bad cop, the motorcycle cop comes up and he was just like, he goes, you better just say what he wants to hear because he's just going to get more and more upset. And this could go very badly for you. So he came back and he was like, so, you were, just fess up, you were masturbating in your car, weren't you? And I sat there and I was like, I knew that this was not the case. And I was in a situation where I was going to have to say something that was not true just so I could get home or hope I could get home. So all I said was yes. I didn't say verbally. I didn't confirm what he said. I just said yes. And he was like, it was all right then. He goes, get out of the car. And so I got out of the car, and he proceeded to basically just ransack my car. Wasn't looking for anything. He was just throwing things around. And while he was doing that, he was asking me questions, like what was my dad's name? Where did my dad work? What would my dad think? Should he call my dad? And the motorcycle cop was actually being very sincere in his attempts to keep me calm. So for him, I don't think that it was an act, but what they ended up doing was calling a patrol car. So they were going to take me into the station and tow my car. So when the squad car pulled up, I was immediately mistreated by that officer. Verbally, not physically, just being made fun of during the entire ride to the police station. And at the police station, obviously they had phoned ahead. They'd called, they'd radioed it in. And as he's walking me through the front door, every single person in the police station, including the public that were there, they all knew. They all started making fun of, and they all started, they all started shouting and whistling and asking if I was, his date. And so they took me upstairs and they shut me in one of the interrogation rooms. Nobody came in. They just sat me there. And the mirror was there, so I knew that there were people on the other side. And for the next hour and a half, I sat there by myself with other police officers outside the door yelling that they should put me down in the holding cell and just let the other people that had been picked up, let them do whatever they wanted to with me. A couple of them said that they should, that they themselves should just take me out back. And if I really wanted to know what it was like to be, a woman, to be shown what that was like out back. And so the threats, were nonstop. There was never a pause in this. And I remained seated. I remained calm on the outside, but, on the inside, I wanted to get up and try to get out of that room. But I sat there. I just kind of rocking back and forth. And eventually the undercover or the unmarked cop, he came in and he sat down. He was less angry than he had been outside when they pulled me over, but he still made threats here and there about that I could be arrested because even though I wasn't doing anything, just being there as I was actually in Indiana considered public indecency. But he said he said that he was going to let me go, and that that what I had to do is I had to go into therapy, and he had to have proof of that therapy, or he was going to issue a warrant for my arrest. Now, I was 19, and I was scared to death, so I really had no idea what any of my rights were. So as I got up to leave, he decided he was going to take mugshots. So they led me to that room. Took my pictures, then made me take off my wig, and took more pictures. And then he goes, okay, that's it. And just get the hell out of my station. And because your car's been impounded, your car's been towed, you'll need to get that. And I asked, if they were going to take me to it. And he was like, no, because you need to call a cab. So I called a cab. And the driver pulled up eventually. And I waited outside the police station because it was nothing but taunts inside. And so the cab driver pulled up, and he was very nice. And we went to the tow yard to get my car. And as I was getting out, he said that he wasn't going to go anywhere until I pulled out of that parking lot, because he didn't trust them. And he reached in his glove box and he pulled out a pistol and set it on his lap. So I went in to get my car, and was immediately met with laughter and that from these two gentlemen at the tow yard. And finally, a woman named Mary came out, told them to get the hell away from the desk, and she helped me. And so I went and she got my car for me, and as I was pulling away, the cab driver who had been sitting there, made sure that I was okay. And once I assured him that I was, we both pulled out together. And that did make me go back to college. That did make me go find a therapist on campus who, and this cop has no idea how instrumental he was in actually bringing me to where I am now. Because when I found this therapist, and as I walked into her office, her words were, "Do you want to embrace this, or do you want to get rid of this?" And I paused for a moment. I was like, well, I mean, I want to embrace it. And her reply was good, because there is no getting rid of it. She goes, there is no conversion therapy. There is nothing that this is a part of you. And so we talked for 2 months, and it was the most freeing thing that I'd ever had. It was open, and I was conversing, and this person knew everything about me. And she was sending letters off to this cop every 2 weeks saying that therapy was going well. And at the end of 2 or 3 months, she sent the final letter that we had made great progress, and that that she was done with me. And so life went on. I was more at ease with who I was. College continued. I had plans to leave Indiana after graduation and head to California and to transition. I knew this was really, California was where you needed to be to do this. And then life got in the way. I ended up meeting a girl who I fell deeply in love with. And she knew most of how I felt. But we got married, and we actually had a daughter. And we lived, amazingly happily together. Indulging here and there in letting Jen, out of the bag, so to speak. But as the marriage progressed, we were always open in our communication. There were always hints toward me transitioning. In 2011, and we'd been married for we'd been married for 20 years at that point. We were out, and it was on our anniversary, and she asked if I was happier as Jen, and I was quiet. I didn't really give a reply, but I remember looking at her and just the look of compassion on her face as she looked back at me, and she just assured me that no matter what the answer was, that it was going to be okay. And so I told her yes. And we spent the rest of our anniversary dinner talking about where we were going to go next, like what was next. When was I going to tell family? How much, when was this going to happen? All of that. And the plan was to stay together through transition and after. But as time progressed, we realized this probably wasn't going to happen. She went into therapy, basically going through the stages of loss, which in essence, she was losing her husband. So it was met with disbelief and with anger and nothing terrible. As a whole, we actually dealt with it really well. There were days that she would lash out, and then that lash out was usually followed up within a day or two with an apology, not meaning what she said. But through all of it, I never lashed out back at her. I knew that she was in pain, so I just let her. Whatever she needed to do to get through that pain, I just let her do it. And if that meant that I was her punching bag, then that was fine. In late 2012, I finally found a therapist in Indianapolis. It wasn't too far away from us. who dealt with trans issues, and now we had a full name. The umbrella term of transgender was now fully used, and so I remember going and meeting with him, and his comment to me was kind of funny, because he said that generally people that he met with were on the very beginning stages of this, and it was his job was to guide them through this. And where I showed up was really at the end of the process. I had worked through everything, on my own. I knew who I was. I knew where I stood. I knew where I was headed. But I needed him to get hormones, and then follow along that path of transition. And it was funny, because I actually had to end up reminding him that I needed the hormones, because he totally forgot. He thought I had actually already transitioned physically. And just because he had never seen a male in front of him. And so I began hormones and living full time on February 18th of 2013. 5 days later, my wife and I celebrated our 22nd wedding anniversary, and the following Monday, we filed for divorce. So we had basically stopped living together. She had moved out to her parents. She would stay at the house maybe twice a week. Some weekends, I would take like a Saturday and I'd go out to her parents' house, and we would all hang out. But it was the marriage was over, and appropriately enough, on April 1st of 2013, our divorce was finalized. And I really didn't know what I was going to officially do from there. I had been working at Target just because unemployment in Indiana. I had worked for PBS, and our governor had pulled all of the PBS funding, so I had lost my job. There was no real broadcasting or video production jobs in the area, so I applied anywhere I could get. I got on at Target, and they were fantastic through my whole transition. I actually, transitioned to living full time on the sales floor of Target, and was never met with nothing bad ever came of that. I was never threatened. I was never made fun of. And the store manager had said, even if anyone ever threatened me or anything, or if I felt unsafe, to call her, and they would be escorted out, and they would never be allowed back in the store, because she wouldn't stand for that. So I continued working there, and I ended up getting a call from a friend out in LA that the company she worked for up in Fremont was about to expand their office down to LA, and they were looking to hire at least one person. So I submitted my information, not thinking I would get any kind of a response. But I did. I got an interview. So I took the interview thinking that nothing would come of that. And then they offered me the job in late June. And I really just sat there now trying to figure out if I could afford to move to California. What would it be like to leave my wife, my daughter, my ex-wife, my daughter, leave my entire life behind. But I decided to do it. The company knew I was trans. They fully embraced it. It meant nothing to them. So I moved to California and was completely alone for that first year that I was out here. There was actually one point where it was I had felt that I had made such a huge mistake. I was not understanding the job that I took, even though I knew everything about it. It wasn't clicking. I was missing my parents. I was missing my life in Indiana. I was missing my ex-wife. And, my life consisted of work, going home, staying in my bedroom, watching Netflix, going to bed and waking up and doing it all over again. I didn't go anywhere. I didn't do anything. And so those walls, really started to collapse in on me. And there was one particular day, it was probably March of 2014, probably around the time of my ex-wife's birthday, that I ended up, I was a mess. I was a wreck. I was sitting on my bed and was getting this increased tunnel vision. I could feel, the blood, or I could hear actually the blood, just like pounding and coursing behind my ears. And with one quick and a very easy motion, I ended up with the barrel of a gun, in my mouth. And I actually pulled the trigger, but there was nothing. There was nothing in the chamber, and I jumped up and ran into the restroom and just was howling and just, I was crying so much that I could do nothing but scream. So I remember climbing into the shower and flipping that on and just sitting in the bathtub fully clothed, and just crying, and shaking uncontrollably, as the shower, beat on me. And it was about the only thing that I actually felt physically was the water hitting me. after 5 or 10 minutes, I mean, it felt like it was, hours, but I know that it was only just a handful of minutes. I basically heard that whooshing of blood behind my ears go away, and found myself going from this darkest moment of pain and tears to laughing. I was laughing hysterically at where I was at that moment, sitting in a shower with my clothes on, completely drenched. And so I got up, got out of the shower, left my clothes in the tub. I'm just standing in front of the mirror, and when I had gone into the bathroom, I couldn't even see a reflection in that mirror. And at that point, when I came back out of it, I could see myself standing there, and it was comical. My hair was a mess and was just hanging there. But it was at that moment that, like, I truly saw myself. I saw this woman that, I had spent 47 years trying to meet and embrace and become. And I knew then that I was going to be okay. I dried off. I went back into my bedroom. I grabbed my cat and was, hugging him, and wouldn't let him go despite, him trying desperately to get out of my arms at that point. And I stopped staying in my room. I actually ended up probably within about the next week making a friend through Facebook, actually, and they ended up telling me about this trans group that met at the LGBT Center in Hollywood, and so I ended up going to that, and it just everything in my life now has been a direct result of that breakdown and going to the group on Friday nights. And I have this amazing circle of friends here now. I have they're not, I mean, they are my support group, but I'm kind of more their support group. I mean, I've been as low as I could possibly get, and it's my nature to take care of people around me as much as I can, and so I did. Everyone in that group has my phone number. They can call me at any time if they just need an ear. My best friend, I met her through that. She actually lives with me. She's got her own rough patches that she goes through, and I'm there for her all the time. And it's nice to look back and see where I was, really just 2 years ago, and how it could have easily ended on that night, but it didn't, and I'm eternally grateful for that. Life has been nothing but rewarding. A year ago, I started what I called my year of yes, which started with doing an interview for an award that Caitlyn Jenner was getting from Glamour magazine. And even though my part of the video didn't get played, quotes from it were actually in the article on Caitlyn. A few weeks after that, I actually got to meet Caitlyn at a launch party. Not knowing that she was going to be there, I didn't even know what I was walking into. I didn't even know what the party was. But I'd been told I should be there, so I said yes. So I got to meet her and talk and cry because she had been someone that had been in my life when I was a young child. So, as a young boy at the age of 7, I was looking up to this male Olympian. And now at, both of us in the second part of our lives, I transition and then, then she transitions. And to have someone that meant that much to you growing up now mean that much to you as an adult in a completely different capacity is very rare. And so we talked and hugged and laughed and it's from that point I've done so many things that I never thought that I would. Life has been fantastic. I've done background work on Transparent. I've done background work in a couple of commercials. I started doing theater again. I was in a play last March. I hadn't been on stage in probably more than 25 years. I started drawing again. I started writing again. I started doing a lot of things that had gone and taken a back burner because family came first. And because I was still struggling, with being trans and being married and figuring out how that all was going to work out. My ex-wife and I are also very good friends. I went back to visit in June and we decided we were going to meet up for coffee. So we hadn't seen each other since I had moved out here, July of 2013. So almost 3 years since we'd seen each other. And afterwards, we had no idea what emotions were going to come up. And so we talked for it's about an hour and a half. But we talked and all we did was catch up. And there were no emotions. There were no tears. And that night, I texted her and I was like, hey, it was good to see you. I was surprised that there really wasn't any tears or emotions. And she's like, yeah, she goes, that was really cool. And we basically texted, for about an hour, about how great it was that we were able to meet up and not feel anything from one another. And we laughed about it and to be in that place, and the realization that we were who each other needed, for 22 years. We provided the strengths that one another needed to get us to the next point in our lives. And now we hit that fork and our lives are completely different. And we have no regrets of being married or of divorcing, actually. So we talk every so often. And I mean, just that life is good now.
LGBT Stories is produced and hosted by myself, Kevin Gertis, and our intern is Kate Mays. Kate also is the producer of our Friday First Kiss Friday episodes. Our logo was designed by Ryan Heller. Check out his work and his memoir at ryanheller.com. The LGBT Stories community is not limited to only this podcast. Join our already thriving and supportive community on Facebook groups. This is a closed group that is monitored closely to maintain the safety and comfort of those who join. Visit facebook.com/groups/LGBT Stories to join the club. And I have to let you know, there is 3 questions that you must answer before I can approve you for membership in that group. This is a place where we want it to be safe and comfortable for all the members, so I need to make sure that everyone who requests access is vetted properly. And if Instagram and Twitter is more up to your speed, you can follow us there. Our handles on both those platforms is at our LGBT Stories. Be sure to comment on one of our photos so we know that you joined us there. We'd love to say hello to you all. Rating LGBT Stories on iTunes is a fundamental way to help our show reach the ears of more listeners around the world. We're asking for your help in accomplishing this. If you would, please rate the show in the iTunes podcast app by scrolling down and giving a 5-star rating. There you can also leave a comment about your favorite part of this show or the last episode that you listened to. Check out our website at ourlgbtstories.com, where you can donate to LGBT Stories and help support us and our cause. It takes a lot to produce this show. It is myself and Kate. Anything that you can donate is wonderful. Just go to the website and at the top you'll see donate. You can also shop some of our merchandise there, buy some t-shirts with some cool different LGBT wording and labels on there as well. So ourlgbtstories.com is the website. I look forward to the next episode and thank you all for supporting us. Remember to keep loving one another.